My name is Brielle Hartley. I'm 43 years old. They told everyone I failed. Not directly, of course. That would have been rude. Instead, they let the silence say it for them. At family dinners, when someone asked what I was doing now, there would be that pause, the kind that hums with pity. And then a swift redirect. Something about Nathan's latest promotion or my mother's new garden project. My name floated across the table like a stain they didn't want to notice. At my brother's corporate gala, I sat quietly in the back. I wore black, simple, clean. Not to blend in, but to not offend the shine around me. Then his boss looked over, locked eyes with me across the crowd, and whispered, "Wait, you're—" The room stopped. Forks froze midair. Even my father, a man never short on words, couldn't speak. That's when it began. But to understand what that moment meant, you'd have to know who I was before they erased me. And once, not that long ago, I commanded one of the most respected urban fire and rescue units in Phoenix, Arizona. I led dozens of men and women into infernos most people only saw on the news. Chemical plant explosions, residential collapses, drought-fueled warehouse fires. I didn't just fight flames, I fought fear, my own and everyone else's. I wasn't supposed to be there, not really. There were no women commanders when I started. No lockers for us. No one said it aloud, but the message was clear. We're waiting for you to mess up. But I didn't mess up. I held that role for nearly 14 years. Until the Silverline industrial fire. It was July 2018. A heat wave, a faulty valve, and 10,000 gallons of compressed gas. By the time our team arrived, the east structure had already collapsed. People were still trapped inside. One of them, I'd learn later, was a CEO. Important, powerful. But in that moment, he was just a man pinned under burning metal. I got him out. I got 6 others out too. I didn't make it out unscathed. A falling beam dislocated my left shoulder. The burn across my ribs went deep, 3rd degree. My breathing hasn't been the same since. After months of rehab and silence from the department, I was given an offer. I didn't request early retirement. No medal, no ceremony. Just a form letter and a pension calculation. I moved out of Phoenix quietly, traded adrenaline for ash. Now I run survival workshops at a community center near Flagstaff. Basic first aid, fire escape planning, the occasional field drill. It's not nothing, but in the eyes of my family it might as well be. My brother Nathan, on the other hand, is a story worth telling. Handsome, well-spoken, Ivy League MBA. He joined O'Reilly's Biotech right out of grad school and scaled their ranks like a man born to lead. Now he's their youngest ever director of global communications. At Christmas, they read his LinkedIn posts out loud at the table. When I speak, they ask if I still do that campfire safety stuff. My mother changes her Facebook banner whenever he's featured in a magazine. My father introduces him as the one who made it out of the smoke clean. What does that make me? I'm the older sister. The one who didn't marry, didn't publish a book, didn't start a foundation or win a fellowship. Just someone who once ran toward a burning building and never really came back out. The thing is, I never needed them to clap, but I didn't think they'd erase me either. So when Nathan invited me to his company's gala, I said yes. Not out of hope, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see what it felt like to sit in a room full of applause. And no, none of it was mine. I didn't expect anyone to notice me, but someone did. And everything changed the moment he said, "Wait, you're..." That was the first time in years someone looked at me and actually saw. Most mornings begin the same. I boil water for tea, not coffee. Coffee reminds me too much of station shifts, the burnt smell, the adrenaline, the way it never really cooled. Tea is gentler. Tea asks nothing of you except time. My apartment is small. 2 rooms, one of them half filled with fire-resistant gear I never got around to donating. I tell myself I'll give them away. But part of me, the part that still wakes at 2 a.m. from phantom sirens, keeps them like a second skin I might need again. I walk to the community center where I teach. It's 8 blocks away, tucked between a shuttered bookstore and a laundromat that smells like citrus and old steam. The center has peeling paint and uneven floors, but it breathes with purpose. Every Tuesday and Thursday I teach basic emergency prep, how to use a fire blanket, how to identify smoke directions, how to break a window without cutting your wrist open. My students are mostly teenagers, a few tired-looking parents, One woman who wears sunglasses indoors and asks too many questions, but I answer them all. I don't tell them who I was. Not really. They know my name, my title. They see the small plaque on the door that says Instructor Hartley, Certified Fire Response Trainer. But that's all. Most don't ask for more. Except today, one of the newer kids, maybe 15, stayed behind after class. She wore her hoodie up the whole time and barely spoke. But as the others filed out, she lingered by the door. "Miss Hartley," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Did you ever actually save someone?" For real, she didn't mean anything by it. Just curious. Young people want stories. They think survival is measured by how dramatic your past sounds out loud. I looked at her. She waited, eyes steady, unsure if she'd crossed a line. I didn't answer. I just smiled, the kind that isn't really a yes or a no. She nodded as if that was enough and slipped out. After she left, I locked the classroom and walked back to my office. I sat behind the desk that wobbled on one side and stared at the far wall. There's a photograph there, slightly warped from heat damage. It's been with me since the day they mailed my last paycheck from the department. In the photo, I'm kneeling in soot. My face is half covered by a gas mask slipping sideways. My left shoulder is burned through the turnout coat. And in my arms, limp unconscious, is a man whose name I didn't know at the time. We'd found him under collapsed scaffolding. His pulse was weak, his legs broken. I dragged him nearly 70 feet, coughing blood through my own mask. I remember the sound of steel groaning behind us, the way it felt like the whole world might fall. Someone took that photo just as we cleared the building, seconds before the roof collapsed. I've never shown it to anyone, not my parents, not Nathan, not the kids here. To them, I'm just a woman with calloused hands who knows a lot about extinguishers and bandages. And that's fine. Some stories are too heavy to pass around like trophies. But today, as I looked at the photograph, something felt different. Not louder, just closer. Like the past had leaned in. I took the photo off the wall, ran my thumb along the blackened edge. The frame creaked. The heat had warped the glass years ago. I set it down, not to hide it, just to breathe. Outside, I heard the last kid's bike tires squeal as they rounded the curb. I wonder what she told herself on the way home. Whether she imagined me as some kind of movie firefighter pulling people from flame in slow motion, or if she thought maybe I'd never saved anyone at all. Either way, she wouldn't be wrong, because both are true. It came in the middle of a Thursday, quiet, unspectacular, like most days in Flagstaff. The message arrived just after I'd rinsed out the coffee pot at the community center. Not tea this time. Today had felt heavy, the kind of weight that clings to your shoulders for no particular reason. I checked my phone like I always do, expecting maybe an update from the Fire Watch program or a reminder from the pharmacy. Instead, it was from Nathan. Aurelis is hosting its annual gala next week, the message began. Company-wide event. You should come. That was it. No hi Brie. No hope you're well. No emojis, no warmth. Just corporate efficiency in lowercase letters. I stared at it longer than I meant to. My thumb hovered above the screen. I didn't type anything back. Not yet. It had been months since I'd heard from my brother, and even then it was through a forwarded news article about some award he'd won. I'd replied with a simple, "Congrats." He hadn't responded. This invite didn't feel personal. It felt polite, as if someone had asked him if he had family to include, and he didn't want to say no. Still, something about it lodged itself in my chest. Maybe it was the suddenness. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't even asked if I was available, just assumed. I went back to scrubbing the pot, but my thoughts stayed stuck. What would I even wear? My last formal dress had shoulder seams stiff with age. My old uniform jacket still hung in the closet, reeking faintly of smoke I could never fully wash out. Was I meant to bring anything? Did he want me there? Or just need to check a box? By sunset, I still hadn't replied. But I kept hearing the question from that student earlier. Did you ever actually save someone? It had unsettled me in a way I hadn't admitted. Not because it was naive, but because it echoed something deeper. A quiet fear that maybe over time I'd become invisible to everyone who hadn't been there with me in the fire. Maybe this was a chance not to prove anything but to see how I'd be looked at in a room full of suits and spotlights. To see whether I still existed in their version of the family. I typed out a response. Sure, let me know the details. It felt odd sending that. like I was RSVPing to a stranger's wedding. A few minutes later, Nathan replied, "It's next Friday, black tie optional, dinner at 7. Still no looking forward to seeing you. Still no glad you're coming." I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. There's a moment between agreeing to something and actually doing it that feels like standing on the edge of a lake in winter. Not quite cold enough to back away, not warm enough to dive in. That's where I was. I reached into the drawer by the filing cabinet, pulled out a lint-covered ticket stub from a wildfire symposium I attended 3 years ago. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe to remind myself I used to be part of conversations that mattered. Beside the stub was a folded card, a thank you note from one of my students. "Thanks for teaching us how not to die." A joke scribbled in messy handwriting, but it stayed with me longer than any plaque ever had. I held both items in my hand, the stub and the card, and suddenly the idea of going didn't seem so strange. Maybe I wasn't going for them. Maybe I was going for the version of me that still believed I could walk into a room and not apologize for existing. Maybe I was going to remind myself I still had a name. I arrived 10 minutes early. That wasn't on purpose. It's just a habit from years in the field when on time meant too late, and the difference between 10 minutes early and 10 minutes late could cost someone their life. The hotel ballroom glowed with that filtered, expensive lighting meant to make everyone's skin look softer. Crystalline chandeliers shimmered above a floor of polished marble, and a string quartet played something too delicate to name. I paused at the entrance longer than I should have, adjusting the cuffs of my black suit jacket. It was the same one I wore to my retirement meeting, the only one that still fit right in the shoulders. The fabric was clean but tired. The lining at the collar had begun to fray. I checked in at the welcome desk. The woman scanned the list. "Name Brielle Hartley." She blinked, then smiled with the kind of confusion people wear when they think they should recognize you but don't. "Ah, yes. You're seated at table 11, toward the back." Of course I was. I thanked her and made my way through the crowd past clusters of people dressed in jewel tones and designer cuts, sipping from long-stemmed glasses filled with things that fizzed. No one turned. No one stared. I might as well have been a coat on the back of a chair. At the front of the room, a massive screen displayed the Aureli's logo in gold, slowly pulsing like a heartbeat. Beneath it on the central table sat my family, my parents, my brother Nathan, his colleagues, their partners. They glowed in the spotlight, my father in a dark gray tux, his cufflinks catching the chandelier's light. My mother in deep emerald green, her hair swept into the updo she always reserved for occasions that matter. And Nathan, perfectly pressed high, nodded like a news anchor's, leaning in to whisper something to the man on his right. Probably his boss. None of them turned around. I found my seat, back row right side, close enough to hear the clink of forks, far enough to be forgettable. There was a single white rose in a slim vase at the center of my table. Beside it, a name card printed in gold foil. B. Hartley. Not Ms., not Fire, Captain Hartley. Just the letter. I sat down. The woman next to me in a navy dress with pearl earrings offered a polite smile. I nodded back, but neither of us spoke. There's a certain kind of silence in these rooms. It doesn't come from shyness. It comes from choreography, an unspoken dance of who belongs where and who doesn't speak unless spoken to. I knew that dance. I used to watch it from the firehouse windows, just before we responded to emergencies at the places these people lived, worked, and celebrated in. The room began to fill more quickly now. Waiters in black aprons glided between tables, placing folded napkins and water glasses with synchronized precision. At the front, someone tapped a mic. The sound echoed through the room, gentle but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Aurelius's annual Impact Gala. Tonight we honor not only the milestones of science and innovation, but the people who make them possible." A round of applause. Not raucous, just appropriate. I looked back toward the front. Nathan was already smiling, rehearsed, and camera-ready. I hadn't seen that smile in person in nearly a year. I folded my napkin onto my lap, sat straighter, not because I wanted to, but because a small voice inside whispered, "You're still allowed to take up space. It's funny, you can train your body to run toward fire, but it still forgets how to be comfortable in a room where no one expected you to show up." I glanced around. No one had looked at me yet. No one had waved. No one, not even my own family, had acknowledged that I was here, but I was. I was here. and that I told myself was already more than they expected. The first speaker was introduced with the kind of reverence usually reserved for astronauts or Nobel Prize winners. Please welcome to the stage our CEO and founder, Mr. Clay Benton. Applause rippled through the room. Everyone at the front table straightened in unison, like a wave of choreographed pride. My father clapped a little harder than the rest. My mother smiled the kind of tight, restrained smile she uses when she knows cameras are nearby. Nathan adjusted his cufflinks, glanced once at the teleprompter, then folded his hands like a man who helped write every word. I didn't clap, not out of protest, just, I don't know. My hands didn't move. Clay Benton stepped up to the podium. He looked like a man who didn't apologize, often tall, clean-shaven posture, like he still played squash at 6 a.m. on Thursdays. His voice was smooth but had the slightest rasp. Years of speeches, and if I remembered right, years of smoke. He started with the usual, the achievements, the company growth, the global impact. He thanked the donors, nodded to the board, sprinkled in a joke about traffic in downtown Phoenix. The room loved it. Then as the applause faded, something shifted. Clay paused. He glanced over his shoulder at the teleprompter, then looked away from it. A breath. Slight. Sharp. I want to share something off script, he said. There was a murmur of curiosity, but polite, controlled. He stepped away from the podium holding the mic, like it suddenly mattered more. His gaze scanned the audience sweeping overhead, searching. Then it landed. On me. He stopped mid-step, stared, his eyebrows lifted not in confusion but in recognition. Wait, he said softly at first. Then louder. Wait, you're... I didn't move. He stepped off the stage slowly, like something fragile had just surfaced in his chest. You're the one, he said. You're the firefighter. Silverline Industrial, 2018. You were the one who pulled me out. Every sound in the ballroom stopped. Forks froze above plates. Wine glasses hovered midair. Even the string quartet tucked away behind a hedge of ferns silenced their bows. My father's mouth fell slightly open. My mother blinked twice, then reached for her necklace like it might explain something. Nathan. I watched him sat utterly still, color draining from his face like someone had just pulled a plug behind his eyes. Clay kept looking at me. I remember your voice, he said. You shouted through the mask. Don't close your eyes. I've got you. That was you. I'd never forget that voice. I could feel every pair of eyes now heavy as floodlights trained on my back. My profile, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I didn't speak, I just nodded. A single quiet motion. Clay nodded back. There was a flicker behind his eyes, something like disbelief softened by gratitude. He turned slowly to the audience, then back to me once more. I've been trying to find you for years. He didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Awkwardness is what fills the space when people don't know what to say. Reverence is when they know they shouldn't say anything at all. Clay returned to the stage. The rest of his speech, I don't remember a word of it. The only sound I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. And beneath it, that old voice, the one I'd buried years ago. You're still allowed to take up space. I looked down at the white rose on my table. It had tipped slightly, leaning toward me like even it had been waiting to be acknowledged. I straightened it in the vase. Then I sat a little taller. I wasn't a shadow anymore, not tonight. I slipped out before dessert. The applause had faded. The lights had dimmed to a soft gold. Somewhere behind me, wine was still being poured, and small talk resumed like someone had pressed play on a paused scene. But I couldn't stay seated. I needed air. Not just outside air, but distance. From the room, from the eyes. From the silence that had finally broken too loud to bear. The hotel hallway was quiet. Carpeted. Lined with oversized art in muted tones. I walked slowly, not rushing, not fleeing. Just choosing to leave. I reached the elevator but didn't press the button. I leaned against the wall instead, facing the opposite direction. Then I heard him. Footsteps. Hesitant, but fast. Nathan. He said my name like a question. Brielle. I turned my head slightly, but didn't move away from the wall. He stopped a few feet behind me. I could feel the tension in his posture before he said anything. The stiffness of someone used to holding power in every room, suddenly uncertain of the script. You should have told me, he said. Before tonight. You should have said something. I took a breath, still facing forward. Why, I asked. He blinked. I heard it in the pause. Because. His voice dropped. Because I looked like a fool. I turned then, met his eyes. You mean I said you looked surprised? He didn't answer. You didn't look like a fool, Nathan. You looked like someone who didn't know. And maybe that's the part that bothers you most. He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't expect he started, then stopped. Okay, maybe I didn't ask, but you never offered. I folded my arms, not out of anger, out of armor. Did it ever cross your mind to ask even once after Silverline? He shifted his weight. I thought you wanted space. You left. You didn't exactly invite conversation. I almost laughed. And yet you sent me an invitation to tonight. What changed? He hesitated. Too long. I nodded to myself. That's what I thought. He sighed. Look, this isn't how it was supposed to go. No, I said it's exactly how it was supposed to go. The only difference is that for once, I didn't stay invisible. There was a long pause between us. Somewhere down the hall, a server pushed a cart, the wheels squeaking slightly on the thick rug. Neither of us moved. Nathan's voice softened. I didn't mean to make you feel erased. I nodded, slowly. You didn't mean to. That's the problem. It never even occurred to you that I was missing. He looked at the floor. I adjusted the strap of my purse. The leather had grown worn at the edges. For years I said I sat through dinners and reunions where people celebrated your speeches and your success. I clapped when no one clapped for me. I listened when no one listened back. He looked up again, eyes tired now, less defensive. Then why come tonight? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Because I wanted to see if I still existed in the world you built. And he asked. I do, I said, but not because of you. I stepped past him toward the elevator, pressed the button, waited for the soft chime. Before the doors opened, I turned my head once more. Silence isn't weakness, Nathan. Sometimes it's the only protest we have left. Then I stepped in and let the doors close. I didn't look back. The invitation came 2 days after the gala. A call from my mother, which was rare in itself. She usually preferred group texts with too many exclamation marks and recipe links no one opened. Her voice was chipper, a little too high-pitched, like someone performing enthusiasm on cue. Sweetheart, she said, we're having dinner Sunday night, just the 4 of us. I thought it would be nice to catch up. I almost asked catch up on what the years you all politely ignored, the decades I spent pretending to be fine. But instead I said, sure. What time? The table was already set when I arrived. Polished silverware, crystal glasses, napkins folded into triangles like hotel service. A casserole dish still steaming in the center, the smell unmistakable, chicken and wild rice, my favorite when I was 10. The detail unsettled me more than if they'd forgotten. My mother greeted me with a brief hug and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My father was already seated swirling whiskey in a glass, like he was trying to read something in the ice. Nathan came down the stairs just as I set my purse on the sideboard. Crisp button-down shirt, rolled sleeves. Barefoot, the picture of casual success. Hey, he said. Glad you could make it. I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. He gestured to the chair beside him. I took the one opposite instead. We made small talk over salad. My mother asked about Flagstaff, like it was a foreign country. My father commented on the weather, then immediately turned to Nathan for updates on the company's latest campaign. Nathan obliged, spoke confidently about quarterly growth and strategic messaging. He cracked a joke halfway through, something about biotech funding and caffeine, and laughed louder than the punchline deserved. I smiled but didn't laugh. The table felt too bright, too clean. Like we were all actors reading from a dinner scene written by someone who had never sat at a real one. When the main course came out, my mother beamed. I thought I'd make something you used to love, Brielle. You remember this dish? I do, I said. Thank you. I took a bite. It tasted the same. That was the strangest part. Because everything else had changed. Midway through the meal, there was a pause, the kind that opens a new conversation no one wants to start. Nathan leaned forward slightly, too casual, so he began the gala. That was something, huh? I said nothing. Just waited. He cleared his throat. You surprised a lot of people. I raised an eyebrow. That's so. Yeah, he said, chuckling nervously. I mean, not in a bad way. Just, No one knew, because no one asked, I said, voice even. The table went quiet. My mother reached for her wine. My father shifted in his chair. Nathan tried again. I think it's great, he said. What you did. What you've done. I mean, people are talking. That's new, I said. Another pause. Then my mother chimed in. We were thinking. Maybe you could do something with it, with the recognition. Speak somewhere, start a foundation. Or maybe help with Nathan's community program. He's working on a really important initiative. There it was. The ask. Wrapped in warmth. Delivered on a plate of nostalgia. I set my fork down gently. What kind of initiative, I asked. Nathan straightened. The air around him shifted. We're developing a campaign for frontline education, he said. First responders. Community prep. We've got early funding, just need a public figure. Someone with authenticity. He said that word like it had quotation marks around it. And you think that's me, I said. He smiled. Well, yeah. You're a hero, Brielle. People love heroes. I leaned back in my chair, looked at each of them. My father silent, my mother hopeful. Nathan rehearsed. The casserole sat untouched in the middle of the table, now slowly cooling under the soft light. I nodded slowly. I see. Dinner ended just as it began, neatly, politely, and a little too quietly. My mother cleared the dishes with a practiced grace, humming something indistinct while my father excused himself to the den under the pretense of a quick work call. Nathan lingered in the dining room with me, swirling the last of his wine. The table still smelled faintly of rosemary and warmed bread. But the comfort had drained from it, like the warmth from a dish left too long untouched. Nathan looked at me with that soft expression he used when trying to steer a conversation, not forcefully, just deliberately. Do you remember that award you got? He asked casually. From the National Fire and Rescue Foundation. I didn't answer at first. I watched a drip of condensation slide down my water glass. Yeah, he continued, as if I'd nodded. The Silver Line operation. They called it the most courageous civilian extraction in decades. My shoulders tensed just slightly. They awarded you, what was it again, 150 grand, right? I looked up then. He smiled, not unkindly. It was a big moment. We were all so proud. Interesting, I thought. That's not how I remembered it. No dinner like this followed back then. No casserole, no gentle questions, just silence. And me trying to rebuild my shoulder and my life in a town where no one asked where I'd gone. Still, I said nothing. Nathan leaned forward. I was thinking, he said, about the new Aureli's Community Initiative. We're setting up a public resilience campaign. First aid, disaster prep, CPR. You know, real impact stuff. He paused to let that settle, but funding's tight. And we need a strong start to draw attention. A real statement of community commitment. There it was. The pitch. He kept his tone even friendly. You're already a symbol, Brielle. People respect what you did. If you were willing to invest, just a portion of that award, say $50,000-$75,000, we could put your name right on the front. You'd be an official co-founder, maybe even more. I sat very still. It wasn't the money that unsettled me. It was the ease with which he reached for it. Like it was unspent, unused, waiting to be repurposed. He mistook my silence for consideration. You never touched that money, right? He asked. I mean, you don't really live flashy or anything. I smiled at that. No, I said. I don't? He nodded encouragingly. So it's just sitting there. This could be a real legacy move for you, Brielle. Something lasting. I looked at him for a long moment. Legacy. That word again. The first time I heard it, I was still in a back brace, learning how to raise my arm above my head again. The foundation chair had said it when he handed me the plaque. Your legacy will live through the lives you saved, he'd said. No one from my family had come to that ceremony. I leaned forward, fingers laced. Do you remember the letter they gave me with that award? I asked. Nathan blinked. No, I don't think so. They called the money a gift of gratitude, I said. A token. Not payment, not charity, just thanks. Quiet thanks. For something no one else saw. He shifted in his seat. I smiled again, not coldly, just knowingly. And it meant something to me, because it came with no strings. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. It's not that I won't help, Nathan. It's that you didn't ask me to help. You expected me to. He exhaled, sat back. I thought we were finally reconnecting, he said, softer now. Maybe we are, I replied. But if you want a legacy, Nathan, build one of your own. I stood slowly, mine's already earned. Then I thanked my mother for dinner, grabbed my coat, and left. No one followed me this time, and I was okay with that. It started with a voicemail I almost ignored. A clipped professional tone asking if I could confirm a few points regarding your recent joint venture with Aurelius. I played it twice just to be sure I'd heard correctly. I hadn't entered any joint venture. I called back half expecting it to be a misdial or a scam. But the woman on the line, a venture capitalist from Saltbridge Holdings, wasn't mistaken. She sounded polite but firm. We've received a preliminary proposal for co-investment, she said, attached to your name and signed by you personally. She forwarded the documents. When I opened the PDF, my breath caught. The header bore the Aurelius Community Resilience Program logo. Beneath that, my name centered and bold, Brielle Hartley, founding partner, emergency training and outreach. The signature at the bottom. It was mine, except it wasn't. I knew every flick and tilt of my signature. The forged one was close, almost perfect, but the pressure line of the B in Brielle was slightly too even. My real signature always leaned heavier on the left loop. Years of writing under stress in gloves on soot-streaked paperwork had made my strokes instinctively uneven. The forger didn't know that. I stared at the page longer than I should have. The next 6 pages laid out a financial proposal using exaggerated language about my career. Heroic pioneer community pillar. They referenced my Silverline rescue in detail, some of which had never been released publicly. It read like someone had weaponized my entire life story for a pitch deck. The kicker, they claimed I had pledged up to $150,000 from personal award grants to seed the project. So that's where this was going. I felt something tighten in my chest. I forwarded the email to my attorney, a quiet, meticulous woman named Denise, who didn't scare easily. Then I sat still for a while. I thought of that dinner, of Nathan's pitch, how easily the words had flowed from him, legacy, impact, visibility. He hadn't mentioned any draft, hadn't asked if he could use my name, he'd just done it. I thought of that moment when he'd said, "You never touched that money, right?" Now it made sense. Saltbridge followed up the next day with a request for an in-person meeting. I declined politely. Instead, I sent them a notarized affidavit, denying any affiliation and confirming the signature was fraudulent. Denise filed a cease and desist. She also recommended we quietly alert the ethics board at Aurelius, just in case internal misuse of identity had occurred. I didn't tell my family, not yet. I wanted to believe maybe it wasn't Nathan, that someone under him had tried to push a deal forward too fast, maybe with good intentions. I wanted to believe he hadn't looked at me, his sister, and seen nothing more than a means to an end. But then late one night I received an email. No subject line, no signature. Just a scanned image of a different document. It was a revised draft. Still used my name. Still included the pledge. Still ended with the same forged signature. But this time it was tracked in the metadata. The document creator, Nathan Hartley. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling strangely calm. Not shocked. Not even angry. Just tired. I thought of that burned photograph in my living room. The one of me carrying Benton out of the blaze. I thought of the way people looked at me when they didn't know who I was, as if I didn't matter. Now the irony, the only time my story became useful was when someone else needed it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I opened an old journal I hadn't touched in years. In it, I'd once scribbled a quote from an instructor at the fire academy: "Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's the fire break before the blaze." And I realized something. I'd been silent long enough. I wasn't trained to investigate white-collar deceit. My specialty had been smoke patterns. Building collapses the fragile edge between life and death. But even after I left the field, some instincts stayed. Observation, pattern recognition, knowing when something doesn't add up. So when Denise sent me a quiet message, "We may have found the origin," my heart slowed, not raced. It had taken her team 2 days. The forged proposal, it had metadata buried deep beyond the obvious. A unique document ID linked back to the device where it had been authored. Traced to an Aurelius-issued laptop. Assigned to Nathan Hartley, but we still needed confirmation, something that made it undeniable, indisputable, court-admissible. That came from an unexpected place. A mistake. A single email copied to the wrong person. A junior assistant in Aurelius's internal PR team accidentally forwarded a batch of presentation slides to my community center address, instead of another Brielle on staff. The email was routine, nothing dramatic. Subject line: final touches before board review. But as I clicked through one slide, made my pulse catch. Page 3, Public Impact Metrics, featuring Hero Legacy Contributor. There it was, my name, my story, and a high-resolution scan of that same burnt photo, the one from my wall. The one no one in my family should have had access to. I sat back. How did they get that photo? I'd kept the only surviving copy, tucked into a folder kept in a plastic sleeve. It had never been scanned, never shared online, unless someone had entered my house. My breath shallowed. I thought back to 2 weeks ago when Nathan had offered to help me move an old bookshelf after dinner at my place. He'd insisted. Said I shouldn't lift anything heavy with my shoulder still healing. I'd gone to the kitchen to make tea. He'd stayed in the living room, alone, for maybe 5 minutes. 5 minutes was enough. Enough to photograph the image. Enough to forward it to his team. He hadn't taken it. He'd copied it. Quietly, efficiently, like I didn't matter. That night I didn't cry. Instead, I printed the email. I placed it next to the digital metadata report from Denise, and I put them both in a plain manila folder, labeled it for clarity in black marker, the kind we used at fire scenes to label unstable materials. I didn't tell anyone I knew, not yet, because I wanted to see what he would do when he thought I didn't. A few days later, Nathan called me. He sounded casual. Too casual. Hey, just checking in. Wanted to thank you again for joining the gala. A lot of folks were impressed. Some donors asked about your background. I may have included a few highlights from your career, just to build the connection. Hope you don't mind. I let him speak. I said nothing. He asked if I'd had a chance to consider his idea about the donation to Aurelius's community project. How aligned it would be with my values. That word again, aligned. I told him I'd think about it. After we hung up, I looked down at the folder. The evidence was already damning. But part of me wanted more. Not for court, for understanding. So I reached out to someone I'd never thought I would. My father's old friend Thomas Wren, retired, former audit advisor for a private equity firm. The kind of man who used to sit at family dinners and talk more about balance sheets than birthdays. He agreed to meet. No questions asked. I showed him the documents, the fake pledge, the forged signature, the photo, the pitch deck. He studied them quietly. Then he leaned back and said he knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned, calculated. I already knew. But hearing it from someone else, someone who understood systems, made it harder to pretend it wasn't real. I asked Thomas one last question. Can people change after this kind of thing? He looked at me for a long time. Sometimes, he said, but not before they're forced to see what they've become. That night I sat in my living room again. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the fan and the ticking clock on the wall. The photo still hung there. I didn't take it down, but I added something new beside it, a printout of the slide they had used. I wanted to remember what people do when they believe your silence means permission. But silence isn't consent. Sometimes silence is preparation. The smell of grease and old rubber hit me first. Not unpleasant, familiar in a way that tugged something loose in my chest. Rowan Pike's garage still looked the same after all these years. Faded license plates lined the wall. A rusted bell clanged as I stepped inside. And there he was, bent over the hood of a '97 Chevy, hands dark with engine oil, a rag slung over his shoulder like always. He didn't look up. "You're walking heavy," he said, voice gravelly but steady. "Either that shoulder's flaring up again or something's weighing on you." I smiled faintly. "Both, maybe." He straightened, turning to face me, same weathered face, same eyes that used to cut through smoke and panic in a heartbeat. "Brielle Hartley," he said, slowly wiping his hands. "Didn't think I'd see you this decade. I didn't think I'd show up either," I said. "But here I am." He gestured to the back, to a cracked leather bench behind a tool chest. "Come on. Let's sit like we're not pretending to fix something." We sat without words for a while. Just the ticking of the engine cooling the whir of a fan above, and the occasional distant bark from the dog that always seemed to be somewhere behind the shop. Finally, I said, something happened. Someone I trusted, someone close, used my story, my image, my silence. for their own benefit. And I was going to go to the police. I still might. Rowan didn't blink, just leaned back staring at the ceiling. Do they know you know? Not yet. He nodded once. Then you still have power. I looked down at my hands at the small scar on my left knuckle burned during a 3-alarm warehouse fire when I was 26. I'd never had it removed. I never wanted to. Is it wrong that I want everyone to know what he did? I asked. That I want to show them who he really is. Rowan leaned forward. You remember the Underhill fire? My stomach tightened. Of course. I was command lead that night. I made a call, pulled back a crew 5 minutes early, didn't follow protocol. That decision saved 3 lives, including yours, I remember. But the paperwork said something different. HQ never knew the call came from me. They credited it to Lieutenant Dawson. I let it stand. I frowned. Why? He looked me square in the eye. Because it wasn't about me. I knew I'd done what mattered. I didn't need the headline. I needed to sleep. I stayed quiet. The fan above us buzzed softly. You, he said, ran into fire your whole life. You carried people on your back when anyone else would have run. You saved men who would have never remembered your name. And now you want people to know who you are. That's not shameful, but ask yourself this. He paused, his voice low and unflinching. Do you want justice or attention? That question stung. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. I swallowed. I want to reclaim my name, I whispered. Not for applause, but because I feel erased. Rowan nodded, and that I understand. But Brielle, surviving doesn't always look like screaming into microphones or slamming doors. Sometimes it's just showing up, holding your ground, letting the truth rise like smoke, quiet but impossible to ignore. I breathed in slowly. That was always his gift, seeing through the fog. I'm not saying don't act, he added. Just don't let your pain become your compass. Let your dignity be. We sat there for a while longer, until the afternoon sun dipped low and sent golden rays through the garage's dusty windows. Before I left, he handed me a box from beneath the bench. What's this? Something I kept, he said. Thought one day you might want it back. I opened the lid. Inside was a scorched badge, mine, from the Silver Line fire. I'd thought it melted in the collapse. I looked at him, eyes blurring slightly. He just shrugged. You earned it, he said. Not them. Not the company. Not the headlines. You. I held it in my hand for a long moment. It felt heavier than I remembered, but also somehow lighter. I didn't know what I expected when I sat down with a blank sheet of paper that evening. Anger, maybe. A quiet kind of rage spilling out like smoke escaping the cracks of a sealed door. But the words didn't come that way. Not sharp, not bitter. Just tired. Just honest. Nathan, I wrote. You probably don't realize this, but I remember everything about that night. The Silver Line fire. The smoke wasn't just thick, it was alive. It pressed against my lungs like a wall. The air tasted like burning plastic and metal, and every breath felt like swallowing razors. I didn't even notice my shoulder dislocate when the beam collapsed. I kept crawling. My hand paused over the page. I closed my eyes, let the memory guide the ink. There were bodies. You never forget the weight of a body when the life has gone out of it. You never forget the silence that follows a scream once it's too late. And then I heard a voice, faint, garbled through layers of steel and fire. Someone was alive. Someone was begging not to die. I gripped the pen tighter. I followed the voice through the furnace. I remember thinking this might be my last act. Not as a hero, but as someone who refused to leave a voice unanswered. He was pinned beneath part of the mezzanine. I had no idea who he was. Just a man with half his face, burned eyes wide with terror. I told him not to move. Told him I had him. Even though my arm was nearly useless, I found a way. I wrapped him over my shoulder. My own body cracked with the weight. The alarms had gone off twice by then. Collapse was imminent. I didn't look back. I don't remember walking out. I just remember the wind hitting my face when we burst through the loading dock doors. I collapsed the moment we hit open air. I paused. My eyes scanned what I had written, but my mind was far from it. I remembered the way his hand wouldn't let go of my arm, even unconscious. I remembered the way they told me later he had coded twice on the way to the hospital. I remembered waking up 3 days later, unable to lift my left arm. And I remembered nobody from home visiting. I never told anyone because it felt like enough to have survived. I never called a news station. I never chased a headline. I watched from my kitchen when Clay Benton became CEO of O'Reilly's. I never connected the dots until he stood there at your gala and recognized me. The pen stilled again. I suppose what hurts most isn't the lie I continued, but that you never thought to ask what was true. I was your big sister, Nathan. I taught you how to tie your shoes. I read you comic books when you had nightmares. I cleaned up your messes more times than you'll ever know. And still, the moment I stopped wearing the uniform, I became invisible to you. I let the silence in the room sit with me. It wrapped around me gently, not cold this time, not sharp, just present. I'm not angry, I wrote. I'm disappointed that you felt the need to steal a name that was already yours by association. If you had asked, I would have said yes. I would have let you use my story for the right reasons. I folded the paper carefully, but I didn't seal it, didn't stamp it, didn't place it on the kitchen table like a dagger waiting to be found. I tucked it into a drawer. Sometimes the act of writing is enough. Sometimes the words aren't meant to be heard, they're meant to be carried. I exhaled. And in that breath, something shifted. I wasn't done yet. It started with a ping. I was slicing apples in my kitchen the way I always do, quietly, methodically, when my phone lit up with a message from Claire, a former firefighter I still kept in touch with. Hey, is this about you? I wiped my hands on a towel and tapped the link. It took me to a post on one of those local networking forums, half community updates, half gossip disguised as civic concern. There was no name, no profile picture, just the title, When Family Hoards. What should have helped everyone. My stomach sank. The first paragraph hit like a slap. Some people wear uniforms and medals. Others wear silence. But what if silence hides selfishness? What if someone kept a $150,000 donation meant for victims' families and used it for themselves? I didn't need to read more, but I did. I watched this person, my own sibling, get praised for something she did once years ago, while the rest of us kept working, kept building. Meanwhile, that donation just disappeared. Not a single cent given back to the community, not one. There were no names, but it didn't matter. Everyone knew who the post was about. My inbox filled in minutes, people from the gala, a few former neighbors. Even a mother from the center where I taught first aid messaged, "I'm sure it's not true. But if it is, could you at least explain?" Explain. I sat down slowly, the phone still in my hand. I thought back to the moment that award check was placed in mine at the hospital 2 weeks after the fire. I could barely sit upright. My shoulder was in a sling. My hair had been singed off on the left side. They gave me the check quietly, privately. They said it was part of an anonymous fund set up after Silverline meant for first responders who'd gone above and beyond. I didn't use it. I never deposited it. In fact, it was still folded in a safety envelope, tucked behind my medical records in a locked drawer. I hadn't shared it, not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't know what to do with it. At the time, my injuries were fresh. I couldn't return to active duty. I couldn't lift a fire hose. I couldn't drive. And I didn't want to turn my story into a brand. So I did nothing. I lived quietly. I paid my rent from my savings. I taught CPR to teenagers and retirees. I made enough to buy groceries and donate bandages when the center ran low. Was that selfish? My hand trembled slightly, not from rage, but from something deeper. Sadness, disappointment, that my own brother couldn't face me, that he had to turn to strangers and imply something I couldn't defend with a soundbite. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very same man who had forged documents using my name, who had asked me to share that donation for his corporate project, was now accusing me of hoarding it. He knew the truth, and he lied anyway. Because it's easier to paint a villain than admit your own failure. I didn't comment, I didn't share, I closed the app. But by sunset, my photo cropped from an old city article was circulating. So was my name, so was the phrase Rescue Fund Hoarder. I watched it happen from the outside, like looking through glass. The kind of storm you know you shouldn't step into, but also can't ignore. That night, as the world debated my worth, I opened the drawer in my bedroom. The envelope with the check was still there untouched. I I held it in my hands and stared at the date December 18, 2018. It was printed in blue ink above a faded signature. I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. This time, I wasn't going to let silence do all the talking. Not anymore. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. The center always buzzed around 9 a.m. Voices of teenagers echoing through the hallways, CPR mannequins being dragged across the tile floor, my assistant Luann calling out for someone to stop goofing off with the AED training kit. But that morning, it was just me. And silence. I unlocked the supply closet, placed a new box of gauze on the shelf, and waited for the classroom door to creak open like it always did. It never did. At 9:15, I checked the attendance sheet. 10 students registered. None had shown up. At 9:30, Luann walked in holding her phone with both hands. She didn't say anything at first, just handed it to me. The screen showed a headline, "From Hero to Hoarder Rescue Fund Sparks Community Outrage." There it was. Right under the masthead was a familiar photo cropped from an old city recognition ceremony, the only one I ever attended. I was in uniform, smiling, younger, and beneath that photo in bold red, "She saved lives." But did she also keep the money meant to rebuild them? I don't remember blinking. I handed the phone back. "It's not just the paper," Luann said gently. "We've had 3 calls this morning. One parent said she's pulling her son from next week's class. Another asked if we were planning to issue a public statement." A public statement. I'd spent my career running into burning buildings, crawling through beams and ash for voices I couldn't see. I had performed CPR in alleys behind restaurants on warehouse floors, once even in the middle of a collapsing stairwell. But none of that apparently outweighed a paragraph on the internet and an accusation without a name. That afternoon, I returned home and found a manila envelope on my doorstep, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of newspaper torn from the opinion section. Someone had circled one sentence in thick black ink: "Heroism fades. Selfishness stains." It was underlined twice. That night, the phone didn't ring. The next morning, it wouldn't stop. Channel 8 left a voicemail, then Channel 14. Then the community press wanted to know if I would be attending the next civic meeting. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask for my side. They wanted spectacle. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, unsure what to do with my hands. So I opened a drawer and took out the thing that had started it all. The check, still folded in thirds, still inside the envelope with the hospital seal, still untouched. I placed it on the table and just stared at it. After a moment, I pulled a worn clipping from the bookshelf nearby, a framed article from 2019. It had yellowed around the edges. The headline read, "Hartley pulls CEO from Flames Miracle Rescue at Silverline Industrial." That paper used to hang on the wall of the firehouse. They gave it to me when I retired early after the injury. I had framed it not to gloat, but to remember the cost. The heat, the screams, the way my right shoulder tore as I lifted Clay Benton from that corridor. Now the 2 headlines sat side by side, Miracle Rescue and From Hero to Hoarder. It felt like whiplash, like my life had been split into 2 halves, and someone had carelessly discarded the part that bled. I didn't cry. I made tea. Because that's what I do when I feel a storm coming. I keep my hands busy. The boiling kettle steadies me. The weight of the mug grounds me. Later that evening, as I poured the tea into a cracked ceramic cup, I looked out the window of my tiny living room. There was a young boy across the street, maybe 10, riding a bike too big for him, wobbling, laughing, and I realized something: his parents might read the news tomorrow and tell him never to take a CPR class from that woman. They might use my name as a cautionary tale, but they didn't know me. They only knew the silence I had allowed. And I realized then I couldn't stay silent much longer. It took me 3 tries to dial his number. Each time I stared at the name, Clay Benton, and hesitated as if the phone itself might burn me. But by the 4th ring, he picked up. His voice hadn't changed, calm, low. That same slight rasp I remembered from the hospital bed, back when he had no eyebrows left and couldn't stop apologizing to everyone for causing the fire. "Brielle," he said, like he had expected this call long ago. "I need to talk," I said. He didn't ask why. We met the next morning at a quiet cafe 2 blocks from his office. He wore no suit, just a navy sweater and jeans like any other man on a coffee break. But when I stepped in, he stood. His eyes, still sharp, softened when they met mine. "You saved my life," he said, before I could even sit. "I might have ruined my own," I replied. I told him everything. About the fake proposal papers, the forged documents, the blog post accusing me of hoarding money, the silence that followed me like smoke in a closed room. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I told it like a fire report, fact by fact, burn by burn. Clay listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned forward slightly, clasped his hands together, and said, "You need to speak. Publicly." I blinked. "I'm not doing this for attention," I said quietly. "I don't want the spotlight." "This isn't about the spotlight," he replied. "It's about the people who once looked up to you, who believed in what you stood for. You don't owe them a defense, but you can still give them clarity." He took a breath. "You once told me back in the hospital that fire never lies, that when everything else burns away, what remains tells the truth." I nodded. I had said that, long ago. "Well," he continued, "your silence has let others shape the ashes into something they want. Not what was, not what is. And if you stay quiet, that lie becomes the only truth people remember." I stared down at my tea, now cold. He was right. This wasn't about clearing my name. It was about protecting the idea that integrity still mattered, that someone could walk away from heroism quietly and still deserve peace. I stood up. "I'm going to write something," I said. "Not a rebuttal. A story." Clay smiled just a little. "That's what I hoped you'd say." The invitation came in a pale gray envelope, thick like cardstock, with my name printed in clean serif letters across the front. Inside it read, "You are cordially invited to speak at the Aureli's Public Relations Conference, Frontline and the Untold Stories." I held the card for a long time, turning it over in my hands. The irony didn't escape me. The very company my brother worked for, the one that had nearly erased my presence from our family narrative, now wanted me to stand under a spotlight. I didn't say yes immediately. I needed a few nights, a few slow walks around my neighborhood, a few quiet moments with the photo still scorched at its edges, me carrying a man on my shoulders, flames in the background, fear in my eyes. But I said yes, not for them. For the version of me that had survived without applause, and for the young people in my first aid class, who only ever knew me as Miss Brielle. The auditorium was grand. Stage lights glared down with the usual harshness, but the seats were soft, upholstered in navy velvet. Someone had arranged a water bottle at every podium, a printed schedule taped behind the curtain. The banner above the stage read, "Stories that deserve the mic." I was the final speaker. The day moved like fog. CEOs, crisis responders, nonprofit directors, all telling stories about pressure and leadership. But none of them mentioned what happens after the applause ends. When my name was announced, I heard murmurs. Not polite applause, but real ones, scattered at first, then building. I stepped onto the stage in my charcoal suit. I'd brushed the dust off my old dress boots and pinned a small silver phoenix to my lapel. It was quiet. Then I saw them. My family seated in the front row, Dad adjusting his tie nervously. Mom, her hands clutched around a purse, like it held answers. And Nathan, his eyes fixed on me, unreadable. I adjusted the mic. "My name is Brielle Hartley," I began. "I used to be the fire operations commander in Phoenix District 5. I paused, letting the weight of that sentence settle. I retired early, not by choice, but by circumstance, a torn shoulder, the kind that ends careers without asking if you're ready. I didn't read from paper. I didn't bring slides. I spoke like I was still in the smoke, still crawling through the dark. I was trained to enter buildings that were falling apart. What I wasn't trained for was what happened after. The silence, the headlines that faded. The way people stop looking you in the eye when your name isn't tied to something useful to them." I heard someone shift in their seat. "I didn't come here to ask for sympathy. I came because there's a difference between being forgotten and being erased." More silence. In 2018, I carried a man out of a burning factory. I didn't know who he was. I just knew he wasn't breathing, and that I'd be damned if I let him die on my watch. I turned slightly, eyes landing on Clay Benton, seated 3 rows back. That man is here today. And like me, he rebuilt his life from ash and concrete and bone. The crowd shifted. I let them sit in it. My story didn't end in fire, but it began there. And even if it was never told in my family's photo albums, it mattered. It saved someone. And that alone makes it worth telling. I stepped back from the mic. There was no music, no stage lights dimming dramatically. But the applause that rose wasn't polite, it was human. Nathan didn't clap. But my mother did. I didn't use names. Not the name of the man I pulled from the burning factory. Not the name of the person who forged my signature, twisted my past, and tried to sell it like a product. Names didn't matter, not here, not now. Instead, I stood at the podium and told a story that wasn't just mine. It belonged to every person who had been silent, because it was easier, who had swallowed pain, because shouting would have made them seem bitter. The auditorium had gone still. Not quiet out of politeness, but the kind of stillness that meant people were listening, truly listening. I steadied myself and began. It was late, past midnight. The Silver Line call came through on a frequency we didn't usually hear. Industrial, chemical. A roof reported unstable. I was leading the second unit in. I could feel my pulse rising as I spoke, not out of fear, but muscle memory. That night had burned into my skin more than the fire ever had. There was a man pinned under collapsed scaffolding. Steel rebar through one shoulder. His pulse was faint. The temperature was climbing. A rookie firefighter beside me hesitated. I told her, "If he's still breathing, we don't leave him." Someone in the crowd exhaled sharply. I couldn't lift him alone, so I used my own body as leverage. I took the weight of the rebar on my back, lifted with what was left of my strength, and pulled him free. I don't remember much after that. Just heat. And his breathing. Shallow but real. My throat tightened not from nerves, but from memory. That man lived. I learned that much later. But that night didn't make the news, not in detail, because it wasn't dramatic enough. No children saved. No hero headline. Just a woman with a busted shoulder and a man with a second chance. I paused and glanced down at my hands. No paper, no script, just the weight of my truth. I never told that story publicly. Not until today. And not because I'm proud. But because sometimes silence doesn't protect us, it just delays the moment we're asked, "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" The room remained still. No cameras clicked. No one shuffled in their seats. I looked toward the crowd, toward the blurred outlines of my family in the front row. I couldn't read their faces, but I didn't need to. I continued. There are two ways to be remembered. For what you hold on to, or for what you let go of. I could feel the words leaving me like something I'd carried too long. I could stand here and list the names of those who disappointed me, who betrayed me. But that would only tether me to them. And I'm not here to be tethered. I looked up directly into the lights. I'm here because I've learned that truth doesn't always have to shout. It can stand quietly with its spine straight and simply be. A beat past. A long one. I'm not interested in vengeance. Not today. What I want is simpler. To remind you and myself that sometimes the strongest thing we can do is refuse to retaliate, to stay kind, to stay human. I took a breath, one that didn't shake, because the moment we define ourselves by what others did to us, we lose something precious. But when we define ourselves by how we responded, that's where our story truly begins. The applause didn't start immediately. It rose slowly like a tide. Some stood. Some remained seated. Some just sat with wet eyes. I stepped back from the mic. Nathan didn't clap. But again my mother did. And this time she stood. I stepped down from the stage, my heart steady. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just whole. For the first time in years, I felt like all the pieces of me were back in one place. As I walked past the first row, I saw him. Nathan. He wasn't clapping. His hands were still in his lap, but his head was bowed. Not in shame, not entirely. More like someone who had heard something they couldn't unhear. I paused for a moment, not expecting anything. Then slowly he looked up. His eyes met mine. No performance, no mask. They shimmered slightly, not quite tears, but the verge of them. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just nodded. A simple motion. But it carried more weight than any apology I could have forced out of him. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was an admission. A surrender. A quiet offering from a brother who had run out of words. And I nodded back. Not because it fixed anything. Not because it made up for years of silence or for the storm he helped brew. But because somewhere beneath all of that, there was still the boy who once held my hand in a thunderstorm. The one who used to sneak me his Halloween candy when I was scared of the dark. And maybe, just maybe, that boy had found his way back to the surface. Sometimes healing doesn't sound like fireworks. It sounds like silence. But the kind that softens, not cuts. The kind that says, I see you, I remember, and I'm still here. It came in the mail a week after the speech. A simple envelope, no return address, just my name written in his unmistakable left-leaning scrawl. I opened it at the kitchen counter, the sunlight cutting across the linoleum like a quiet witness. Inside was a single sheet of paper, unlined, slightly crinkled. And his words. Brielle. I've written and torn up more versions of this letter than I'd care to admit. I don't know if I even have the right to ask you to read it, but I hope you do. You don't need to forgive me. Honestly, I'm not sure I'd believe you if you said you did. What I did, what I allowed, what I twisted, and what I said wasn't just petty. It was cowardly. I convinced myself you had your moment, that your silence meant permission. But that night at the gala, when Benton looked at you and the whole room turned toward the woman they didn't know they owed, something shifted. In me, I always thought admiration came from applause, from titles, spotlights. I chased that. I built my image on it. And you never needed it. Watching you speak, not naming names, not demanding revenge, but just standing there whole and calm, I realized I didn't understand what strength really looked like until that moment. You carried me out of that fire too. I just didn't see it until now. I'm not writing for redemption. I'm writing to say thank you. For surviving. For not turning cruel. For being the kind of person I thought only existed in stories we tell our kids before bed. Love, Nathan. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me, but because it felt like it didn't belong to sorrow. It belonged to something softer. Something like peace. I folded the letter slowly and slid it into the drawer next to the photo. Yes, that one. The scorched edges, the blurred outline of me carrying that man through smoke and flame. For years that image held pain. Now it held something else. The center reopened 2 weeks later. After the media storm, after the doubt and the whispers, I hadn't expected anyone to come back. But that Monday when I unlocked the door, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Emily's mom. She had been one of the first to pull her daughter from my classes. I remembered the polite email, short, formal, apologetic. Now she stood holding Emily's hand. The girl waved shyly, her little red backpack bouncing. I wasn't sure if we'd be welcome, the mother said. I opened the door wider, always. Inside, dust still lingered on the folded mats and first aid dummies. The room felt asleep but not abandoned. Like it had been waiting too. By the end of the day, 4 more students returned. No one said much. They just followed the drills, wrapped bandages on foam limbs, practiced CPR compressions. And then mid-session, a man raised his hand. He looked vaguely familiar, maybe from the neighborhood association. I just wanted to say something, he began, voice firm. I was one of the people who believed the article. I shared it. I thought I knew the full story, he paused. Then he looked straight at me. I didn't. I was wrong. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was clean. Honest. I nodded. Thank you. He returned to practicing chest compressions, his movements more focused than before. That night I stayed behind to sweep. As I moved the broom slowly across the floor, I found an old training bandage tucked behind a chair, frayed at the edges, used but still intact. I smiled. We weren't starting over. We were continuing. Sometimes trust doesn't come back loudly. It comes back through open doors, through returned glances, through children showing up to class one by one. It was never about clearing my name. It was about being someone who stayed kind, even when the world forgot how. And somehow that kindness found its way back. The lesson that day was about heat exhaustion and burns, how to recognize the signs, how to treat them quickly, and most importantly, how to stay calm when your hands are shaking. We were gathered around the training pit outside the center. A small fire crackled in the steel barrel we used for demonstrations. The wind was light. The sun angled just enough to make the embers glow orange like they had a heartbeat. One of the younger students, maybe 9, maybe 10, watched the flames quietly for a while. Then he turned to me and asked, almost as if he didn't expect an answer, "Miss Brielle, are you afraid of fire?" The group fell silent. I looked at him, his face still soft with childhood, his eyes waiting for truth, not comfort. And I said, "Yes, I am." His brows pinched together, confused. But you're not supposed to be, you're a firefighter. I nodded slowly. Exactly, I was afraid of it. That's why I had to understand it. I picked up a small branch and tossed it into the barrel. Sparks jumped and curled, then disappeared. If we keep running from things that scare us, we give them all the power. But if we stop and really learn what they are, we can face them without turning our backs. The boy was quiet again. Then he asked, "Does it still hurt?" When you remember my hands without thinking, went to the faint scar near my wrist, the one no sleeve could cover completely. I traced it once gently, then put my hands in my lap. Yes, I said. Sometimes it does. But pain isn't always the enemy. It's what reminds us we got out, that we lived. I looked around at the circle of students now listening more closely than ever. The fire popped softly, sending up a small ribbon of smoke. I don't teach you these skills so you can become heroes, I continued. I teach you so you know how to help, how to stay when someone needs you. That's the thing no one talks about. Sometimes courage isn't pulling someone out of a burning building. Sometimes courage is sitting next to the fire and choosing not to run. I passed it every day on the way into the classroom, but this time I stopped. The photo familiar burned at the edges, frozen in time. Me crouched low in my soot-covered uniform, lifting a man over my shoulders, while the smoke behind us churned into the sky like a monster still hungry. That image had been with me through every version of myself, the fighter, the patient, the forgotten, the doubted. But now it looked different. It wasn't just taped to the wall anymore. It was framed in oak, simple but strong. And just below the glass, a new edition handwritten on cream paper in neat block letters. A hero doesn't need applause, just the chance to live honestly. Nathan Hartley. I hadn't known he dropped it off. One of the volunteers told me it appeared yesterday, carefully wrapped with a small note. She probably won't hang it, so maybe just hang it for her. I stood there a long while, not reading the words over and over but letting them settle. He hadn't used the word sorry. He didn't need to. Regret comes in many forms, but humility, quiet, unperformed humility, that's rarer. Behind me I heard footsteps. Emily, the student from weeks before, peeked in. Are we still doing the bandage drills? I smiled. We are. We practiced in the afternoon light, shadows from the framed photos stretching across the mat. At one point, a parent stepped in to watch. She didn't speak, just nodded toward the wall. That you? She asked softly. It was, I said. Still is, she corrected, then added, and more. Later that night, I locked up as usual. But instead of going straight home, I stood outside for a moment, looking up at the sign above the center's entrance. It didn't bear my name. It never had. And that felt right. I wasn't here to be remembered. I was here to stay. Not because I needed redemption, but because someone someday would need the things I'd carried through fire and silence, and I wanted to be here when they reached for them. Some flames don't burn to destroy. Some burn to light the way. Jai sila noidong ket lai video. Tôi kan ban hai wording noidong na yo kao jam bao jung voi noidong va ting tan kwa. Kich ban ma chung tavua tuk hien hai. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today, wherever you are. We hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.